in which our happy couples learn that life is not easy, whether as newlyweds or as recent divorcees. Chapter 17. The hotel in the provincial capital where Nikolai Levin lay was one of those provincial hotels that are set up in accordance with new, improved standards, with the best intentions of cleanliness, comfort, and even elegance, but which, because of their clients, turn extremely quickly into dirty pothouses with a pretense to modern improvements, and by that very pretense become still worse than the old hotels that were simply dirty. This hotel had already reached that state. The soldier in a dirty uniform, smoking a cigarette at the entrance, who was supposed to represent the doorman, the gloomy and unpleasant wrought iron stairway, the casual waiter in a dirty tailcoat, the common room with a dusty bouquet of wax flowers adorning the table, the dirt, dust, and slovenliness everywhere in the hotel, and with that some sort of new, modern, railwayish, smug preoccupation, gave the Levines, after their newlywed life, a most painful feeling, especially as the false impression made by the hotel could not be reconciled with what awaited them. As always, after the question of how much they wanted to pay for a room, it turned out that there were no good rooms. One of the good rooms was occupied by a railway inspector, another by a lawyer from Moscow, and the third by Princess Astafiev, coming from her estate. There remained one dirty room, with an adjacent room which they were told would be vacated by evening. Vexed with his wife because what he had anticipated was coming true, namely that at the moment of arrival, when his heart was seized with agitation at the thought of his brother, he had to be concerned with her instead of running to him at once, Levin brought her to the room they had been given. "Go, go," she said, giving him a timid, guilty look. He silently went out the door and straightway ran into Marya Nikolaevna, who had learned of his arrival and had not dared to enter his room. She was exactly the same as he had seen her in Moscow, the same woolen dress with no collar or cuffs, the same kindly, dull, pock-marked face, grown slightly fuller. "Well, what? How is he?" "Very bad. Bedridden. He's been waiting for you. Are you with your wife?" Levin did not understand at first what made her embarrassed, but she explained it to him at once. "I'll leave. I'll go to the kitchen," she managed to say. "He'll be glad. He's heard, and he knows her and remembers her from abroad." Levin understood that she meant his wife and did not know what to answer. Let's go," he said. But just as he started off, the door of his room opened and Kitty peeked out. Levin flushed from shame and vexation with his wife for putting herself and him in this painful situation. But Marya Nikolaevna flushed even more. She shrank all over and flushed to the point of tears, and seizing the ends of her kerchief with both hands, twisted them in her red fingers, not knowing what to say or do. For the first moment, Levin saw an expression of eager curiosity in the look Kitty gave this, for her, incomprehensible and terrible woman, but it lasted only an instant. "Well, how is he?" She turned to her husband and then to her. We really can't start talking in the corridor, Levine said, turning crossly to look at a gentleman who, as if on his own business, was just then walking down the corridor with a jerky gait. Well, come in then, said Kitty, addressing Marya Nikolaevna, who had now recovered. But she added, noticing her husband's frightened face, or else go and send for me later, and returned to the room. Levine went to his brother. He had in no way expected what he saw and felt there. He had expected to find the same state of self-deception that he had heard occurs so often with consumptives, and that had struck him so strongly during his brother's visit in the autumn. He had expected to find the physical signs of approaching death more definite, greater weakness, greater emaciation, but still almost the same condition. He had expected that he himself would experience the same feeling of pity at losing his beloved brother, and of horror in the face of death that he had experienced then, only to a greater degree, and he had been preparing himself for that. But he found something else entirely. In a small, dirty room with bespattered, painted panels on the walls, divided by a thin partition behind which voices could be heard, in an atmosphere pervaded with a stifling smell of excrement, on a bed moved away from the wall, lay a blanket-covered body. One arm of this body lay on top of the blanket, and an enormous rake-like hand was in some incomprehensible way attached to the long arm bone, thin and straight from wrist to elbow. The head lay sideways on the pillow. Levine could see the sweaty, thin hair on the temples, and the taut, as if transparent, forehead. It cannot be that this terrible body is my brother Nikolai, Levine thought. But he came nearer, saw the face, and doubt was no longer possible. Despite the terrible change in the face, Levine had only to look into those living eyes raised to him as he entered, notice the slight movement of the mouth under the matted mustache, to realize the terrible truth that this dead body was his living brother. The shining eyes looked sternly and reproachfully at the brother coming in, and that look at once established a living relation between the living. Levine at once felt the reproach in the glance directed at him, and remorse for his own happiness. When Constantine took his hand, Nikolai smiled. The smile was faint, barely perceptible, and in spite of it, the stern expression of the eyes did not change. "You didn't expect to find me like this," he brought out with difficulty. "Yes. No," said Levine, stumbling over his words. "Why didn't you let me know earlier? I mean, back at the time of my wedding. I made inquiries everywhere." He had to speak so as not to be silent, but he did not know what to say, especially as his brother did not respond, but only stared without taking his eyes off him, apparently trying to grasp the meaning of each word. Levine told his brother that his wife had come with him. Nikolai expressed satisfaction, but said he was afraid to frighten her by his condition. A silence followed. Suddenly Nikolai stirred and began to say something. From the expression of his face, Levine expected something especially meaningful and important, but Nikolai spoke of his health. He accused the doctor, regretted that the famous Moscow doctor was not there, and Levine realized that he still had hope. Profiting from the first moment of silence, Levine stood up, wishing to get rid of the painful feeling at least for a moment, and said he would go and bring his wife. "Very well. I'll have things cleaned up here. It's dirty here, and I suppose it stinks. Masha, tidy up there," the sick man said with difficulty. "And once you've finished, go away," he added, looking questioningly at his brother. Levine made no reply. He went out to the corridor and stopped. He had said he would bring his wife, but now, aware of the feeling he'd experienced, He decided, on the contrary, to try to persuade her not to go to see the sick man. Why should she suffer as I do, he thought. Well, how is he? Kitty asked with a frightened face. Oh, it's terrible. Terrible. Why did you come? Said Levine. Kitty was silent for a few seconds, looking timidly and pityingly at her husband. Then she went up to him and took him by the elbow with both hands. Kostya, take me to him. It'll be easier with two of us. Just take me there, take me, please, and leave, she began. You must understand that for me to see you and not see him is much harder. There I might perhaps be of use to you and to him. Please let me, she implored her husband, as if the happiness of her life depended on it. Levine had to consent, and recovering himself and forgetting all about Marya Nikolaevna, he went back to his brother with Kitty. With a light tread, glancing constantly at her husband and showing him a brave and compassionate face, she went into the sick man's room and, turning without haste, noiselessly closed the door behind her. With an audible step, she quickly approached the sick man's bed and, placing herself so that he would not have to turn his head, at once took in her fresh young hand the skeleton of his enormous hand, pressed it, and began talking to him with that unoffending and sympathetic animation peculiar only to women. We met at Soden, but didn't become acquainted, she said. You never thought I'd be your sister. Would you have recognized me? He said, lighting up with a smile as she came in. Yes, I would. You were so right to let us know. There wasn't a day when Kostya didn't remember you and worry about you. But the sick man's animation did not last long. Before she finished speaking, his face became set again in the stern, reproachful expression of a dying man's envy of the living. I'm afraid it's not very nice for you here, she said, turning away from his intent gaze and looking around the room. We must ask the innkeeper for a different room, she said to her husband, and also for us to be closer. If you enjoy this format, please leave a like and subscribe and return tomorrow for the next chapter.